Hi, welcome to part 10 of our Building and Researching Your Family Tree series. My name is Hannah and I am the Genealogy Reference Librarian at the Waco-McLennan County Library's Genealogy Center. And today I will be joined by Bill Buckner, the Genealogy Center Supervisor. And we will be talking to you about migration, immigration, and immigration. Let's get started. Today we'll be focusing on finding records and answering some of these questions. What do you need to know about your ancestor to find their records? What records might give you a clue as to where you'll find them? How does time period and the laws of that time affect what records were created? What type of information are you likely to find? Where can you search for records? And what strategies can you use to be successful in your search? As you do your research, keep in mind family myths and legends. These can sometimes be good clues to lead you to more information, but it's also important to remember that they may not always be completely accurate. A common myth that many people have in their family is that the family name was changed at Ellis Island. However, as this quote from Ann Lewis states, immigration officials did not change individuals' names when they got off the ship at Ellis Island. Their names may have changed somewhere later as part of assimilation or to make things easier for them, but those weren't decisions that were made by immigration officials. So what's the difference between immigration with an E and immigration with an I? To immigrate, when spelt with an E, means to leave one country or region and settle in another. And at that point, a record is created. Then that individual gets on a ship, crosses the ocean, and immigrates with an I. And this is to enter and settle in a country or region to which one is not native. And again, another record is created here. So from that one act of leaving a country and entering a new one, two separate sets of records are created in each country. Here's an example of that. So here we have Charlie Weisinger, and on the left, we see where he is recorded as he boards a ship, the SS New Amsterdam, out of Rotterdam. And he boarded that ship on March 7th, 1923. And then when he arrived in the port of New York on March 18th, he is recorded on another list. This is the arrivals list. So here we have both sets of records, his immigration with an E and his immigration with an I record. So what type of information do you need to know about your ancestor to start looking for their records? Their full name is a great place to start, and all versions of that name. So a woman's maiden name may be important, different spellings of the name. And even if you think your ancestor always used one specific spelling of their surname, know that the people who were writing out the records may not have asked, how do you spell your name? And they may have written it the way they were familiar with it. And so this is particularly important with names that may have various spellings based on language. So here we have young and young. So the Czech spelling would spell it with a J, whereas the Americanized version would be spelt with a Y. The same with first names, Pierre versus Peter. Other important things to know are the approximate age at arrival, approximate date of arrival, and any family stories or lore that you know about how your ancestors came to their new country. Some records that may give you a clue are census records, naturalization records, passport applications, and passenger lists, and we will explore all of these here. Starting with the census. The first year that the census asked about naturalization was 1830. So in 1830, only the head of household's name was recorded, but one of the questions that was asked was how many people live in this house that are foreign born and not naturalized. And so that could be a really early clue to one of your immigrant ancestors. In 1850 and 60, the census started asking for your place of birth. In 1870, They also asked if your parents were foreign born, and in 1880, they added where were your parents born, so getting even more specific. In the 20th century, even more questions were added, including year of immigration in 1900 and number of years in the US, as well as your naturalization status. As years progressed, questions about language also were added to the census. So here's an example in 1900 in Austin County, Texas. This is the family of Gustav and Anna Richter. And here we can see, and although it's a little faded, you can make out that Gustav was born in Germany, and it looks like that's where his parents were from too. And then we see a faded year that's maybe 1884, but it's a little difficult to tell. He's been in the United States for 16 years, so 1884 makes sense if this is the 1900 census. And then we see a PA. The PA is in the column that asks for your naturalization status, and PA stands for papers or first papers. This means that he has filled out his declaration of intent. He intends to become a US citizen, but he hasn't completed the naturalization process. Here in 1910, we see a census record for the same family, Gustav and Anna Richter. Now they're living in McLennan County, Texas. And this time it's more clear. So we see, yes, he is from Germany, and his wife, although she was born in Texas, her parents were also born in Germany. And now, because this image is clearer than the last, we get a confirmation on that 1884 date. And then we see an NA in that column where we had previously seen a PA. The NA means that he has officially been naturalized. So sometime between 1900 and 1910, we should be able to find a naturalization record for him. So what's a naturalization record? A naturalization record is the record that's created when someone officially becomes a United States citizen. If they were created prior to September of 1906, they will usually not list a person's port of arrival. Some will, but most won't. Naturalization records created after 1906 will usually list the port and date of arrival. Here I've included some links where you can learn more information about naturalization records and the laws that govern those over time. These links are also included in your handout, so don't feel like you need to write them down right now. And then you can also find more information about naturalization records and find access to these records at familysearch.org. I recommend using the catalog and then searching by county. Ancestry has some of these records, and then county court records will also have these. So the first type of naturalization record that someone would have created is a declaration of intention or first papers. This is where an immigrant declared their intent to become a United States citizen and renounced allegiance to a foreign government. This normally precedes proof of residence and the petition for citizenship by at least 2 years, but not always. Beginning in 1795, a person could declare their intent at any time after arrival. This means that someone could move to America and the next day go and declare their intention. So here's an example. This is Gustav Richter's, and this was filed in Colorado County, Texas. And here it shows that he came to Texas on the first day of April, 1884. So that matches the information that we had seen on the census. Here's another example, and I included this to show you that not all of these records are going to look exactly the same. The next type of record that someone would have created is a naturalization petition. This follows the declaration of intention and the meeting of the residency requirements. There was a 5-year residency required, and this was briefly raised to 14 years between 1798 and 1802. Until 1922, women derived their citizenship from their husbands, so you will not usually find a woman's citizenship records. Information contained in these records changes over time, so let's look at some examples. This one was filed in 1860, and as you can see, it's very brief, and you get little more information than the fact that Christopher Schrader became a citizen and that he's living in Washington County, Texas. This is from 1892, also in Washington County, Texas. And here you get a little bit more information. So 30 years later, they're starting to record more information. Here, this is 1908. This is Gustav Richter's naturalization record. And by 1908, they were recording much more information. So here's a close-up look of some of the information that you're starting to get in these naturalization records. We get his birthday, where he was born, information about when he immigrated, the ship, what port he sailed into. We get information about his wife, her maiden name. We also get all 10 of their children's names as well as their birth dates. So you're getting a lot of information in these naturalization records after 1906. We're also getting witnesses. These are people who testified that they know this person has lived in the United States, has met the residency requirement, and these people are good people to research as well because these are people who knew your ancestor well. So by researching them, you will learn more about your ancestor's life. The next type of record we're going to talk about is passport applications. These contain facts about immigrations and naturalizations, and you find these not only for immigrant ancestors, but also those who are native born. Passports were not required by law until 1941, but you will find passport applications earlier than that. Foreign travel was much more frequent in the past than you may expect, and many immigrants would return home to visit family for business or to travel with family members who are immigrating to the United States. You can find passport applications on Ancestry Library Edition, and the record set is U.S. Passport Applications 1795 to 1925. Here's an example of what one looks like. On these passport applications, you get lots of details about a person's life, and you will also usually find their photo. Here's some of the details that you'll get. So here we see that Charlie Weisinger was born on January 10th, 1863. We get the place of birth. We get information about his father. We get information about when he immigrated, where those records are filed. We also get information about the trip that he's planning. So we see that he's planning on going to Switzerland, France, and Holland on business and to visit relatives. We get information about when he's planning on leaving, what ship he's taking, where he's sailing out of. When you're looking at these records or any records on Ancestry, it's important that you also look at the pages before and after the record that pops up in your search results. You can do this by using the arrows when you're viewing the original. So in this case, when I used the arrows, I found correspondence about Charlie Weisinger. On his trip, he almost immediately upon arrival, he lost his passport and his citizenship papers that he was traveling with, and a citizen from Hamburg turned them in to the American consulate. And so there is lots of correspondence between Charlie, his daughter, the US Embassy, and all of these people trying to figure out how to get these documents back to him. Now, Bill is going to talk to you about passenger lists.
There are two major periods of time for immigration records, and the split or the date to remember is 1820. So you have pre-1820 records and post-1820 records. This split happens because of the Steerage Act of 1819, and we'll talk about that more. For pre-1820 records, there's some things you need to know. One, there was no required by law for a ship coming over that didn't have to post a manifest. Our National Archive did not begin until 1934 as an archive. This 1819 Steerage Act we'll talk about basically required some legal entities to say what they needed when they came over. There was no central depository of records, as we said, about the National Archive. Very few of the records that did get created exist. The variety of sources that have information, it could be as simple as a newspaper posting, certain passengers got off a certain ship in the river harbor, or something more in depth of a major immigration port, recording something in the county records or state records. But it's a wide variety of information that's available. Some of the basic information that is collected at this time are just basically the ship name, of course, the captain, possibly the date and the port of arrival, and the name of each passenger. Now, it could be just the name. There's no, age or anything else like that that helps distinguish who this person is. So that's sometimes a problem. We have a large section in our collection on immigration. We have state and local histories that include information, genealogical, historical publications, genealogy books. Of course, we have the internet. It's a great source. Ancestry is probably one of the best sources for immigration passenger lists. The records can be arranged by port, by time period, specifically ethnicity. So as you see in our collection, we have Germans to America, Italians to America, the English to America, all kinds of ethnic groupings, and also by religious group. So how to find an original passenger list? Well, you need to compile as much information about your ancestor, starting with yourself and working back till you discover who your immigrant ancestor is. Every little fact that you collect is going to help you in finding the immigration information. So if you know that they're German, you want to look in the indexes that pertain to Germans coming to America. If you know the time period that that individual came, you want to then narrow your focus down to that time period. And then if you can figure out what the port is, where did they come from? Did they get to, say, Texas? How did they get here? Did they go get off in New York and come through the southern states? Did they come down and go to Galveston and get off there and take a ox cart across the state? You have to find that out. There's a couple of links here, and just a reminder that all the links in these PowerPoints are in the handouts. This first one, GermanRoots.com. There's a gentleman by the name of Joe Bine out of Colorado, and he specializes in immigration how-tos and also German information. Excellent source for those kinds of things. And then there's a site here, Immigrant Ships. We're going to show you an example of that in a minute. The major source for this pre-1820 timeframe is a series called Passenger and Immigration List Index, 1500s to 1900s by William P. Philby. This gentleman spent his almost entire career perusing literature, looking for anything about immigrants. And we have this set in print. It started out with a 3-volume set, and then he added basically a supplement every year, and it's just a nice, huge series. It's also available through the Ancestry.com, not the library edition, but the .com version. You can search that online if you have a subscription. How do these indexes work? Well, basically, you take the volume, look it up by surname. Here we have Bridget Dervain in New York, 1851. And then there's this number, this 2597.55. What is that? Well, that is a reference number to a book that you will find in the very beginning or the front of the book. And that number will give you what the source is, where that name was found. So then you look at that name and say, and that book, and say, do we own, or how do I access this particular book? Is it online? Is it in a print collection? How do I find this book? Once you get hold of that item or that book, you can then look it up the name and get additional information. So here we find that Bridget traveled on the Star of the West from Liverpool on May 3rd of 1851. So pre-1820 records, very short records, very broad in their nature of how you would find information. And the Philby set is the main source for that information. In 1819, Congress passed the Steerage Act, and it basically said that any foreign ship arriving in a U.S. port must provide a list of passengers on board the ship to the collector of customs at the port of entry. Now, you have to remember our very first slides about changing the name at Ellis Island. This list was created in the country of origin, not when they got to the harbor and created the list. So 1820 records and later are defined by two different types of record sets. Those, the custom official, so it makes it very easy to see that custom passenger list from 1820 to 1891. And then today we know as immigration, the term immigration, and so those records turned and changed their name to immigration passenger list from 1891 to 1957. Now, custom passenger lists contain a lot more information. Here we have the name of the ship, the captain or the master. Now we get the port of embarkation, the date and port of arrival. Again, we had that, and the passenger name, but now with 5 different columns. So we pick up age, sex, occupation, and nationality, as well as the name. So here's an example. This is from Ancestry. So I want to point out that Ancestry, I think, my personal opinion, has the better images of anything else that I've found out there. So comparing those images across the board to some of the websites, I think Ancestry really has done a great job of digitizing these images. They're a lot clearer. And also, so you have the passenger list. So it has where they embarked from and the different columns. This is the 1884 SS Necker from Bremen to New York. And so what else can we find out? So then by using that shipslist.com, we can look up and find a photo of what that ship looked like. We can see when the ship was built, when it ran, what information we had about its typical port ship run from the ship of a place of embarkation to what port in the U.S. So that helps a lot in understanding about how our ancestor and when they came. Now, Immigration Manifest from 1891 to 1957. This is the second part. These records are considered the post-1820 records. Now, give the government a chance to collect information, and they're going to continue to ask more and more questions. As we can see here, 1893, there were 5 questions. We went from 5 to 21. So before 1893, 5, and then to 21, 1903 to 22, 1906 to 28. Now, 1906 is very important because they finally ask the place of birth, not just the general state or the country like Prussia or Germany, but now the village name, you might get possibly the village name. And from 1907, from 18 to 29, including the address and name of the closest relative in the native country. We get this question a lot. Well, I have my family knowledge that my ancestor was a stowaway or was born on a ship, or possibly my ancestor died on a ship. So where do I find that information? Well, you want to look for a column that indicates death, and it was not required by law. It was typically added. It could be a notation outside next to the passenger's name. It could be an extra listing at the end of the passenger list for that period. Stowaways typically were, if they were caught, they were typically added to the crew list. And so that's a separate listing of immigrants than the passenger list. So how many ports were there? Well, to give you an idea, pre-1820, there were literally hundreds of ports. Philadelphia was a major port, as we would expect in the 1700s. Post-1820, there was about 101 ports and 5 major ports. Do you think you can name them? Well, New York's probably the most popular and most well-known. Baltimore is second, believe it or not. And then Boston and New Orleans and Philadelphia. As you see, if you're from Texas, Galveston was not a major port. It was a minor port, but New Orleans was a major port. So you have to think in terms of, did my ancestor get off in New York and take the ship, or get processed in New York and come down and get off in Galveston or New Orleans? As you can see, there are a few links here. So we are seeing over time, state archives, state situations where they're starting to put out these passenger lists for particular state ports, and that's a good thing. Now, New York, you can see it was divided. So Ellis Island that we know today, prior to that, was called Castle Garden. And there were 100 million plus immigrants processed at Castle Garden. So that's a huge database, free, available to you online. And then Ellis Island, we have LibertyEllisFoundation.org, processed about 12 million plus from this time frame, 1892 to 54. So how do I know what port they came off on? Well, remember some comments from Mr. Bine, Joe Bine, considered where they settled, which ports are the closest to where they may have settled in the United States. Where did they come from? There are certain ports that are known or more common for certain immigrants from certain countries. Also, other records. Have you found clues in your research that might give you the term, say, of a place of an embarkation that you might recognize as where they may have come from? Now in Texas, really nice little read, this series of books called Texas Forgotten Ports. There are at least 30 existing ports, most of them along river ports. Be surprised how many river ports there were, including Corpus, Matagorda Bay, Houston, Port Isabel, Brownsville, and a town that doesn't exist anymore, Indianola. Now, immigration records for the 1820 to 57 period, not all these ports were active during the whole time. You have to remember that. Many listings are known to be missing, estimated up to 40% in some cases that are missing, but they are arranged by port of arrival. Now, immigration records also reflect travel between people that lived in the United States to foreign countries. So you'd have to realize that once your ancestor came here, got here, became a citizen, that ancestor may have traveled back to his home country. That might be the clue that you need to find where they came from, because where they traveled to visit relatives, and that sort of thing. So I have an example here from our last program, my grandfather, Addison Buckner. So we found a listing of him in the immigration records. There he is at the bottom of this page, Addison Buckner, 33 years old, 1906, that was his birth date. And he is going to Havana, Cuba, or coming back from Havana, Cuba on June 15th of 1940. Now, I had to ask myself, what was he doing in Cuba? That's exactly what I said. What was he doing in Cuba? And in looking through my dad's belongings as part of his estate, I found a book that said Addison Buckner, then president of the San Marcos Rotary Club, attended this meeting. It was an International Convention of Rotary International from June 9th to the 13th of 1940. So this immigration record was recording his return from Cuba to the US. And so that now made made sense to me. Also, we found a Cuban coin in the collection of coins. So then that was probably something he picked up on his travels. So where to access these immigration records? Ancestry Library Edition is a great source. Family Search catalog, port-specific websites that we talked about, county records. And so before, in 1906, that it became a district record, you want to look for county records that might show some kind of immigration record, and then print resources of all kinds. So you always want to look for those as well. Let's talk about migration. So you come to the United States and you settle in one state, and then you migrate to another state, and then to another state, from one country to the United States. So migration is the movement of people across geographic areas. So some things to think about. Why did they move, for one? Some ideas of following the crops when their land was no longer any good. Did they follow the crops where they could plant the same crop? Modes of transportation. Was it easier to get on a train than taking an ox cart somewhere? Known trails, routes, removal events like Indian removals, and motivators such as land rushes, that sort of thing. So just take a few more things to think about. The various Georgia land lotteries from 1805 to 33, Austin's old 300 to Texas in 1824, Indian removals from the 30 to 47 in 1800s, the California gold rush, various Oklahoma land runs. So see, these are some of the motivators that might have you see your ancestors moving, and that's one reason you need to think about history and know a little bit more about U.S. history. So here's a map of following the crops. And so if you take one of the colors and follow it across to say to Texas, you can see that farmers didn't have to invent a new crop that they needed to plant and know about. They just followed the migration of the temperature and the land that they knew how to plant, and they ended up migrating following a crop strata. I think that's pretty neat. So methods of travel. How did our ancestors move from one place to another? So planes, trains, and automobiles. It's not the movie, it's just the way that they moved. After wagons, steamboats, and ships. And so what are the routes that were used? Well, these were known trails, established means of transportation, state and international highways. And so think about how your ancestor got from point A to point B, what was the most logical route at the time, and know a little bit of history, and that'll help you out. So things to remember as we close up this presentation. You always want to look for clues in what you've already found. A place, a language, what was your ethnicity? To use a variety of resources, not just the database and internet, but look for a wide variety of records that might help you in this endeavor for immigration, migration, and immigration. Search for records in country of origin and destination. There are lots of censuses out there from the country in which your ancestors migrated from. So you might be able to, once you find out the state or the village they're from, to find that family overseas. And also, we've mentioned, think about historical context. It's important to understand our history and how we moved and the things that affected our ancestors' move and migration across the United States. We want to thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, please feel free, and we would encourage you to contact us at the phone number there you see of 750-5945, and also by emailing us if you want to do it that way. And we're here to help you. So thank you so much. Bye-bye.